And then we spoke about what an API is. By now, you guys should know what API is. We spoke about the um, methods that we have. I went out of the way to also teach you guys about protocols. We spoke about two major protocols yesterday. We spoke about file transfer protocol. We also spoke about hypertext, or should I say HTTP protocol, which is the one that is used for the web. And I told you that because of HTTP protocol, you have now certain standards that are expected when it comes to APIs. And I explained what these standards are. Why do we even need this standard in the first place? I gave analogies as much as possible. And I believe that for those of us that missed the class, we can always go back to it. I hope that it helps a lot. So today, we'll not be going back to all that. We'll be doing a bit of practical. But before the practical class, I wanted to go a bit into yeah, I wanted to go a bit into I will explain briefly this, then I'll show you in practical, right? All right. So what is the anatomy of an API request? Yesterday we've spoken about APIs, right? And we said, okay, usually it's that intermediary interface, that interface in between two systems. So system A is making a request to system B, but he has to make it through an API interface so that the API interface who understands what system B expects can translate it to system B and receive response from system B and then transform it. We explained all of this yesterday. Now, what exactly does an API request looks like? Right? That's what anatomy is. Usually there's something called the API URL. The API URL, I think yesterday Joseph asked that where does endpoint comes in. The API URL is what we call the endpoint. That's URL that you are calling. The URL is like the destination. I explained how these URLs are formed yesterday as well to you guys. I told you that ideally, what this URL are supposed to be is supposed to be IP when we're talking about IP whitelisting, right? I mentioned that they're supposed to be IP, which is 192.63 point something something something. But because and IP is basically the location of the device in which your website is saved. I explained that every single device on the internet has an address. Think of it like a location. It could be, for example, this my table has right, left, everything on this table has a location, an exact location that they are. That exact location is usually what we probably call an IP, right? So every resource on the internet, every device on the internet has its own unique IP. I gave an example. I even went as far as telling you guys that your digital wristwatch has an IP address, your mobile phone has an IP address, your laptop, your TV at home, anything that can actually connect to the internet has an IP address. So this IP address is basically another word to say a location address. And that's why I can track anybody that steals my phone by tracking my phone, right? So I can track somebody that is accessing a particular website, right, by tracking their IP address. And I tell you that but this IP address are complex because it's hard to remember 192.62.4577778.1.111. If I want to say innocent website, I'll say 192.6444. I have to keep all these numbers in my head. It's harder to keep numbers in our head because numbers are not meant to be crammed. They are meant to be executed. When I say executed, I mean you are meant to um, calculate them, right? Words, on the other end, are meant to sync, right? So, because of that, the early computer gurus like you and I, right, decided that, hey guys, let's introduce. I don't know why I'm explaining this again, but hopefully it helps those that are not around yesterday. Let's introduce something called domain name. Domain names are what you now see today, www.google.com, olushola.oluyomi.com. These are domain names that we can introduce that we can then connect to those IP address, which is the location of the device. So when somebody goes to this domain name, it automatically redirects in the background to that IP address. So it's like I am connecting that domain name that I'm buying to that IP address so that even though I don't remember the IP address, the domain name is easy to remember because I can remember that innocent name is innocent. So worst case is your website to be innocentugo.com, right? So it's easier to remember than 192.67555 blah 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 blah, right? So I went back a bit to explain how these domain names comes in. So when you say an API request, you say the first part, the first and most important part of an API request is the URL. The URL is basically the location of the system that you're trying to call or the resource you're trying to call. This is, remember I said that every single resource or is saved in a location and every device or is saved in a device. For example, your videos, your audios can be saved in your flash drive. That flash drive is a device, right? So you can call that flash drive a device and the items inside it a resource. So to ensure that we can explicitly reach that particular device, we need to specify the device location. So this is ideally what we call the URL or the endpoint, as you guys know it. Now, the endpoint in itself also is now broken down into some parts, right? You have the base URL. The base URL is the main folder, or think of, yes, let me use the word folder. You know, I told you that every device has a location. So the base URL is like, think of it as that's your location, the address of your flash drive where you keep all your videos or your pictures or your audios, right? And then the path, usually the path is also another part of the URL. As you can see here, you can see the base URL here to this .co or .com, right? Now we now have the path, which could be this transaction initiate. In layman understanding, I can explain the path as folders, right? You know, if I open my music folder, I can see gospel folder and let's say what other genre? Hip hop, right? And then if I open on hip hop, I can see, I don't know if this is correct because I don't listen to hip hop as much, but I can open hip hop, I can see, oh, the bunch and for example, Coco Master, I don't know. Then if I open the bunch, then I can see all the songs of the bunch. If I open Coco Master, I can see all the songs of Coco Master. So if I would say the path that I took to get to that point, I would say when I get to the device, which is my flash drive, I have to go first into the music folder, which will be slash music. Then I'll go into the hip hop folder, which is slash hip hop. And then I will now go into the bunch folder, which is slash the bunch. Once I get to this place, I can have access to all the music that I need. So usually paths define what exactly you are looking for per time, right? In that folder. Okay, remember that base URL is basically telling you the location of a particular resource. But that location does not necessarily define where exactly it is. The location could be a flash drive. Inside that flash drive, there could be a lot of documents, right? That part itself points you to the exact point that that particular resource you are looking for is found. Again, another example I would give is you have a room, right? If I tell you, if you, for example, if my younger sister comes and say, hey, Egbon, come and give me 10,000. And I say, okay, go to the room and pick it up. If she just leaves, shouts into the room and enters the room and then goes to start for 10,000, where is she going to? She'll most likely come back and say, okay, where exactly in the room? Right? The path defines where exactly in the room for her to find it. Right? I hope these analogies and explanations that I'm giving will help you guys understand path very well. Now, there's a other one that is called query parameter. Query parameter now is, think of it like additional instructions to help you when you get to that request. When you get into that folder, for example, the example I gave the other time, that you get to the debug folder. Now, when I get into the debug folder, I only want to play songs that were produced after 2023. So that way, even though I am now in the place where the resource is, I still want to do a bit of filtering on what kind of, which one I need to use. I'll give you the example of that my sister, I said, go and take the money inside the, when she gets to the place where the money is, she most likely sees more than 10,000 that she needs. But she needs to specifically take 10,000 out of it, right? So that is what query parameter is. So it's like you're filtering a lot, or let's not use 10,000. Let's assume I say, go and pick it from my wallet, right? My wallet is the location because she enters the room. Maybe the wallet is inside my drawer. I mean, for example, she opens my drawer and then she picks up the wallet. But inside that wallet, it is not just money that is there. My business card, my other things are also in the wallet. So I want to filter such that the only thing that I need in that particular resource right now is the money. So in the case of APIs, when you make a request, you want to filter out what comes in. You use query param. Query param is basically just used for filtering purposes. So this is the components of a URL or endpoint, as some of us might know it. So an API, the first and most important one is the endpoint. The second one is the method, which we discussed yesterday, that we have several types of method, at least to the best of my knowledge. We have get, post, patch, put, and delete. We discussed at length what they are yesterday. We'll do a bit of practical very soon so that you see how you see them at work. I was so stressed to get that practical done, so we have to do it. Also, we have another component of API request, which is called the header. Now, this header is a section of the API request that defines usually metadata that are essential for that request. This could be authentication. For example, right? I told my sister, go to the room and take the money, right? But if the room is locked, she probably need key, right? That key is usually put in the header in the case of an API. So those data that you need to be able to access the resource, usually they are oftentimes on the header, right? In most cases, and other instructions, basically metadata, ideally. There's then the other part that is also in an HTTP request is also the request body. Request body is basically what is the content of this request. For example, I'm sending a request that um let's say I'm sending a post request. I'm saying go and put money in my wallet. Go and put this money in my wallet. Then this money in that particular point is the request body. So that item that is she's going to put there is the request body. In the same case for APIs, when we take an action, that usually request body is not always applicable for all methods. It's only applicable when you actually have a body, because there are some requests that doesn't require a body, right? I'll give an example in real life of such request. For example, I call my sister and say, hey, is there light? And she say yes, right? Is there light? And yes, does not require a body because all I'm asking is just acknowledgement, right? She tells me yes, right? I don't have to give her an information to validate if there's light or not. But in a case where I say, go and put this money in my wallet and then confirm how much the total is. In that case, she has to collect data from me, which is the money, and take it to the wallet to go and update the wallet, basically, right? So in cases where you don't need to put an input, like you don't need to have data or send something in transit, then request body is not essential. I will still try to explain with examples pretty much soon, right? Now, this is ideally what an HTTP API request looks like. Every API request has at least 3 of these. And the one that is optional is the request body, because request bodies sometimes don't come in. And in most cases, some APIs don't require headers, right? But it is always there subconsciously, right? But this is basically what the anatomy is. Every API request has to have a method and have to have an endpoint, right? So in most cases. All right, now let's move. Now that we know what an API request looks like, let's move to statuses. Remember, I said that API is like when you send API, you're not just sending because you want to, you like to send API. No, you are sending because you want a response back. For example, I gave an example now that I say, hey, Apro, Alpha, is there light? And then she says, yes, there's light. So which means there's an acknowledgement, there's a response expected from the second system that you are communicating to. So usually when an API request, and that's why we call it a request, when a request is made, there's usually a required response expected, right? So what is the anatomy of response? Usually, when you see 2xx, 2xx means that when you see 200, 201, 204, 203, 20, 20, any two is success. Now, the success can now be dependent, right? For example, 200 OK is used when um, a lot of times when your request is meant to be without content, or in most cases, 200 OK. Now, if I gave an example yesterday that there are some cases when I was explaining webhooks and callback URL, there are some cases where you don't expect the response immediately. Like you don't expect the data that you're expecting immediately because it will take time. So in such case, you can have either 201 or 204, where it says, hey, acknowledgements, we have received your response. In fact, 204 or 201. We have received your request, but we are processing it. Once we are done processing it, we'll send it to that webhook URL that you said we should be sending your response, right? When you see 400, it means client problem. Usually it means the user's problem. Like you are the user. You are the one that is doing something wrong. This could be, for example, 400, 403. This could be, for example, when you're trying to log into a platform and you use wrong password, you have you get. Basically, when you are taking an action that is not authorized by the system, that is not allowed by the system as a user, you have 400. But we have different type of them, right? 400 means bad request. Usually, when you are sending the data that the system is not expecting. 401 means unauthorized. In the case of login, you want to try and log in and your password is wrong, you get 401. 403 means forbidden. Probably you are actually an existing user, but you're trying to have access to a platform that you're not supposed to have access to. For example, you are a user of a system, but you're not an admin. So you go to the admin dashboard. The system will tell you forbidden, because even though you are a user, your password is correct, you are not meant to have access to this particular resource. Another part is not found. Not found is when an API, for example, an API endpoint or URL that you are setting, or a path that you are setting to your API is wrongly set, right? This can always give you, or this can sometimes give you 404, which is not found. Actually, not sometimes, every time. If that does not exist, it will tell you 404. Conflict. When you are trying to take an action that, for example, trying to think of an example where conflict happen. Okay, let me use the example I wrote here. When you're trying to create a user that already exists, you get 409. For example, you're an account, you already have an account with the platform, and then you go and try to create account again. The error that you find in the logs is 409 because there's a conflict of interest. This user already exists. Why are you trying to create it again? Right? Unprocessable is when I'll give you an example. Usually happens with payments. When you're trying to, let's assume the amount that you're trying, good example. When you want to make payments with Paystack, right? and then pay stack tells you copy the amount. Let's assume the amount that is showing is 12,777 naira 50 kobo, and you go and type 12,750 800 naira because you know you're a big man or a big woman. I feel like, okay, they're not supposed to, like, I'm dashing them money, they're supposed to process it. They will reply back that is unprocessable because that's not the expected amount that they were expecting, right? 429, you guys would find this a lot in your career, especially if your development team don't have rate limiting in place. I explained what rate limiting is yesterday. That when you are calling an API call, or when you're building an API, you build it with restriction in mind, that I don't want a customer to misuse this API. So I don't want customers can be very funny. I don't want them to click on the button multiple times and crash my system. So because of that, once the customer clicks it within or takes that action within maybe more than X amount of time within a period of time, then I can say, hey, too much request, right? That's what that 429 is. Every endpoint, and this is very important, every endpoint that you have in your company, every API that you have in the company has to have validation for all of these errors. So when you're writing your acceptance criteria, always remember to consider all of this, right? Usually, for some of us, it already comes as part of our, like, I don't need to think too much about it when I write a user story because I've done it over time. So this comes naturally, but you have to take conscious efforts when you're writing user stories, especially that requires a back-end work, that this has to be validated. Do you understand? And those errors has to be properly handled. It's not that, oh, when I'm trying to log in and I use a wrong password, it's telling me bad request. No, that's a wrong implementation, right? It should say unauthorized, not bad request, right? And this is why a lot of time QAs and product managers fight, because product managers don't know the difference between 400 and 401. And then QA is telling them, no, this is an error. Then the product manager say, it's an error now. Error is error, right? Why must it be 401, right? You need to understand that it means a lot, right? If your developers show 403 instead of 400, your system would be having a logging issue because it will log the wrong problem for the wrong issue. And over time, your system will become very complexly wrong, that you have so much depth and your system will most likely need to be rebuilt from scratch, right? So this is very essential. And this is one of the places that product managers and QA engineers fight a lot, because they are trained to verify all of this, at least for those of them that are good. I've worked with a QA, let me talk. But yeah, you have they are basically trained to think of all of these things. So you have to actually start thinking about it as well as a product manager, especially if you are working in a startup that doesn't have a QA, which means you are the QA of the company temporarily. You have to consider these things so that you don't start with a wrong background. All right. So you have the 500s as well, and the 5xxx. Usually this means that your system is at fault. So when you see 500 error, it means that, oh, your system, the backend, is having problem. Sometimes you have 500 and the backend is not at fault. But in most cases, 500 means that backend is at fault. But sometimes it happens that internal server error is as a result of the input that the user has put in, but it shouldn't be. By the way, it shouldn't be. So in most cases, when you see internal server error, is that maybe your server has an issue, your database has crashed. There's a what do they call it now? There's deadlock in the database and a lot of other things that could happen. And then bad gateway usually also when, like, maybe you are calling an endpoint that is already degraded. Again, what does degraded means? It means that maybe that endpoint usually takes 30 seconds to reply, but now it's taking 2 days to reply, or to respond to you, right? Those kind of things. The gradation starts small, and over time you start getting bad gateway error. Then service is no longer available, 503, and then gateway. That means the endpoint now. What's the difference between 503 and 404? 404 means that Baba, you are using the wrong endpoint. Your endpoint is wrong. 503 means that that endpoint is right. We can see that it used to exist, but right now it's not available anymore, right? That's the difference. And then I've explained gateway timeout. Gateway timeout is okay. So in addition to rate limiting, you can also set timeouts for your system. Timeout means that if anybody calls this API and the API does not respond in 1 minute, timeout, right? And why is this very important? It's important because of something we call deadlock. Every request goes to the database. So and this happens a lot with Jamb, Neko, all those companies we have in Nigeria. It happens a lot with them because they don't have timeouts. So I don't know if some of us have experienced, at least I don't know if it has improved sharp because we have new guys in some of those parastatals that are doing better. So, but yes, in those days, right, if you want to register Jamb, you would have to click on login and then wait for sometimes 30 minutes before it's now finally logs in. It's a very wrong design. Why? Because while you're logging, your own action is in the DB, 50 more people are also trying to log in at that particular time. So they are putting pressure on the database. And over time, there is a deadlock. Deadlock means that now the database cannot even answer anybody again because it's already overheating, right? At the end of the day. So this is very essential. Always consider this when you create endpoint, especially when you are creating endpoint for external use or for internal use that requires a lot of executions, right? Always consider it. All right. This I will explain to you guys. You already know what endpoint is. You already know what the request body looks like. The response schema and the request schema is basically what. Okay, so this is a sample of a request body. Now the schema would be when they say schema, when you hear request body and request body means that the actual request, right? Schema means the request type. For example, this email is type string. I won't go deep into it because of time, but this email is type string. This amount is type either float or int, right? This is also string. This is also string. So you could have something like, if you have something like true or false, it's also Boolean. It's called Boolean. So each of the variable that you have in your request has a data type. So that data type has to be, again, is more on technical side. So don't think too much about it. But yeah, you have the request body. For now, think about request body and then the response body. That's what concerns you a lot of times, right? So I'll be showing you guys what this looks like from documentation. How do I read documentation to know if this works for me or not, right? And all of that while I'm researching. So I'll also be showing you guys how to read API docs today. But what are the checklists to actually check when you are reading an API documentation? The first one is there a sandbox or test environment for this API? Please always ask this question. Don't assume that they don't have a test environment. Always ask. I had an integration. I'll give you an example of an integration. When I wanted to start, there's a company called Sala that we integrated with recently. Being my previous company, the first time we wanted to integrate with them, when I checked, I realized that you have to be in their production environment to use their sandbox. So it was very confusing for me. Like, sorry, we don't want to use our production environment. We want to test in local. And he said, no, they don't have local. They don't have dev environment. You have to make the request directly to their production environment. I said, do you have sandbox? They said the sandbox is for their internal use, not for external use. It was very strange, right? But I remember that I was persistent. I kept on asking, and then they had a workshop with me and showed me, oh, okay, you can create multiple app, and then this app is for your integration, this for. The most important part is ensure that there are multiple environments. I've explained what environments are to you earlier. I've said that usually the first environment where the developers write the code is the integration environment, the local environment. I spoke about the integration staging environment. I spoke about the pre-production environment, which some people also call the user UAT environment. But I also explained that there is also an environment specifically called UAT environment, which is usually also like your production environment, but for a specific set of users. Um, so the same way your partner or the API should exist on those environments. So you should be able to test them. What are the rate limits? I already explained this to you. What error codes does it return? I've already explained this to you too. Is there a webhook for async event? I explained asynchronous request and synchronous request yesterday. I explained this critically. It was not in the material, but I took time to explain it because it's important for you to understand how webhooks works and call back URL, right? What is the SLA and uptime? Remember what I said about timeout. So if the company tells you, oh, we are committing to SLA basically means service level agreements. So the company can tell you, guys, we are committing to give you guys, we are committing to give you, for example, committing to give you 1 minute, right? No matter how bad our system gets, every API request you send would get a response in 1 minute, right? That's an SLA. Now, that SLA now, you can then build your system with that in mind. That if I send an API request and it's more than 1 minute, then cancel the request because I don't want to start waiting again. It means that there's a problem somewhere, right? That's the importance of this. So always um, ensure that you understand what the uptime and SLA is. How long will this take? Is there an SDK for the platform? SDKs ideally help reduce the number of API calls you make, right? Because they are like, um, if you have 10 APIs, it can be abstracted sort of. I don't know how to explain, but it can be abstracted in a way that you can make just one API calls and then the other things is handled on their end, right? That's the advantages of SDKs. All right, so this is all that I think I need to explain about API. So a bit of cat knowledge. Every API has 4 parts: the URL, the method, the header, the body, these 4 parts. They are the anatomy of an API. Endpoint is basically the URL. It's not the entire request. Error codes, 200 means success, 300. What did I say 300 mean? Did I give you guys 300?
No, you didn't give us.
Okay. What did I say 400 is?
Server error.
Server error,
User error.
user error. Then 500, usually server related issue. 300 is very, very rare. In fact, I personally have not experienced it before. Very rare, but I believe that they said it exists. I saw it in, yeah, exactly. So 300 is very rare, almost entirely not possible, but I've heard that it exists in some cases. But yeah, you don't have to worry yourself about it because it most likely will not happen. All right. So before we start, there are 2 different ways that developers document their backend resource. The first one is through Swagger Doc. Swagger documentation looks something like this. Uh, Let me see Swagger Doc. Let me see Swagger Doc. Okay, let's see. All right. So Swagger log looks a bit like this. So it helps you to know, again, they give you the base URL. If you can see in this documentation, it says the base URL. I've already explained what base URL is to you guys, right? So it says here, let me zoom in a bit so that you can see it. It says here that the base URL is petstore.swagger.io. So this is the base URL /io rather. Now, After this base URL, it means that now you can add, if you, for example, want to upload an image, then this is the path. If, for example, you want to add a new pet, then this is the path. So, which means the new URL, if you are adding a new pet, would be pet.store.swagger.io/v2/pet, right? To add a new pet. So, usually, that's as simple as it comes. So actually read an API documentation, right? This is a sample pet store, blah blah blah. You can find the Swagger, blah blah. For this sample, you can use the API key, special key to test authorization filter. So how do I get API key? I guess you can go and find it somewhere here, right? But the point is, usually there's that, and they tell you, okay, is this an HTTP or HTTPS? It's okay, it's HTTPS. Then, okay, this is where you can get your API key. All right. This is where you can put your API key. I think your API key, you have to go to the store itself to go and get it. All right. Anyway, so here in the documentation, when you click for Swagger Doc, when you click on one of the documentations, you can find what the request body will look like. Remember, I spoke about request body when I was teaching you guys. I said some request has request body. So in the request, you see parameter, sometimes called request parameter. You see parameter, usually it means that you have to fill this parameter before you are able to send the request. This will require API key, I think. So you have to fill these parameters, file upload, blah, 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 before you're able to send request. And then it shows you what the response will look like, right? If it's 200 response, you will get this. But this documentation is not very proper because usually documentation is supposed to show you all possible responses, 200, 400, 500, what are the things you'd see if there's an error, blah, 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 right? And this is also an example of a put, right? There's a request parameter body, and then there's a response. Aha, see this now. It shows you that there's a possibility of error. If it's 400, you get invalid ID supply. If it's 404, you get pet not found. If it's 405, you get validation error, blah, blah, blah. So usually, this is how easy it is to read documentation from Swagger, really. And for us as a product manager, why do we even need to read documentation? Say that, for example, you're trying to use this API. Let's assume this API is like Paystack, or let's go to Paystack Swagger documentation. I think Paystack should have Swagger doc. They don't have. What I will definitely have. Think of that on your king. Ah, they made me feel bad, sha. Okay, let me just look for payment Swagger. We don't use a lot of Swagger in our country. Okay. No, that's not what I'm looking for. I think this is the government website for payments. Anyway, so this is an example documentation. Again, the base URL is at the top, just to give you guys that it's always almost the same thing. The base URL, shut up. The base URL is here, so that it's telling you that, okay, this is the base URL here, api.pay.blah, blah, 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 right? And then it's telling you, it gives you instruction on how to get maybe necessary things that you need to do. And then here, you can see the main endpoint to create an invoice. It even puts proper documentation, right, for creating an invoice. This is the request body for the invoice. So this is what a schema looks like. I was explaining difference between schema and body the other time. This is what a schema looks like. The schema specifies the data type of the key. So you are saying this is string, this is string, this is string, and then string, 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 string. So it means that this is automatically generated, so you don't have to worry about it. If I click on tryout, then you can change this to anything you want to change before you actually click on execute. Most likely would fail. It didn't fail. Right? It will fail because there's no API key. So ideally, This is what a Swagger doc means. And there is a button there, as you can see, that allows you to basically test it before you go and meet your engineer so that you see what the actual response looks like. And then you can decide. And why ideally do we do this? Let's assume, right, that you as a product manager, you are trying to, let's assume this is your government website, right? And the government says, oh, every Nigerian has to integrate with this particular system, or every African has to integrate with this particular system, right? Before you even create the ticket at all for your developers, one thing you could do to help them is look at the endpoints that are available. Oh, you can see that this is a post, which means you can take an action. We can create an invoice to the government, and the response, what's the response body? Oh, the response be if it's 200, right? The response means that it will give us a payment URL and the token. So you can think about, okay. So if when we call this particular endpoint to give us payment URL and token, then when we design, our design should definitely have payment URL and token in it, right? So it informs your design decisions. It helps you know if you should add a field to your design, if your design should have plenty things. For example, you might feel like, oh, this is at least this invoice URL now, so the response should at least give us to bust your bubble. This particular government website does not send invoice ID. So if you design a system that is expecting an invoice ID, it means that it's either your system fails or your developer spends time trying to implement something that is not there, right? So this is one of the ways that we actually help fast track the work that we need to do as product managers. All right. This is Swagger. The second one is Postman. Postman is actually one of the most used, right? Let me go to I'll come back here, but let me come here first and do public API network. Wow. All right, so I think Paystack should have something here. OP has. I just realized that OP has API. Lovely. Integration testing, registering, blah blah blah. I think this is their internal service. Oh, this is 1 year ago. Somebody published it out. Terrible people. Maybe it's staff that doesn't want to work with them again. Let me just use with open APIs. Why is everybody naming it OP? Let's just use Paystack. API collection. All right. 6 months ago. Anyway, let me just go to the collection itself. All right. So Paystack has like an entire API collection. You have create, application, blah, blah, blah. So if you click on one of them, usually the cases they have like documentation on what you should do to get what, when, right? This is the most used. Actually, personally, as a product manager, I prefer companies that actually document on Postman, because Postman has, like, unlike Swagger, documentation on Swagger looks somehow weird, right? Imagine putting all this information. It's just weird, right? And you can't even add image and screenshots and all of that. But with Postman, right? They can add screenshots and other information. So as you can see clearly here, it says, okay, you have to have signed up on Paystack, you have to set up an API key, right? All of this, blah, 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 blah. And it even gives you example of how to use the collection. So for example, here, transaction, it could mean I can initiate a transaction with this API. And the beauty of API in API documentation in Postman is that you can save you can save all the response type that you support. For example, if you check this now, request is successful. That means 200 response. This is what you will get. Unauthorized operation. This is what you get. Server error. This is what you get, which means you are not getting any message here. So in most cases, this is what we use for documentation. Personally, I use it a lot for testing, for documentation, the same way like you would use Swagger, just that is more, it's just better, right, in its complexity. It looks complex, but once you warm up to it, you realize that it's way better than Swagger. Swagger looks more simple, but at the end of the day, it doesn't give you as much luxury as you would want, right? All right, so this is how documentations really help us ideally. For example, I'll give another example. Initiate transaction. Let's assume your system, you're planning to initiate transaction. So here in the request body, you can see that, oh, to be able to initiate transactions on Paystack, I need the email, I need amount, I need currency, I need reference, I need callback URL, I need all of this information. So which means you can intentionally decide to request for this information at the point that the user is trying to make the payment, because now you know that it is required by what are they calling their name, by Paystack. And beautiful part, they only specify those things that are required, so which means all of these other informations are not necessarily required, right? If you have the email and the amount, that's good to go for them, right? And then you can check authorization, or they use tokens. Okay, which kind of tokens do they use? Blah blah blah. Bearer token, right? It helps you to understand what to expect when you start building your system, ideally. And it helps you document properly. So when you're writing your user story acceptance criteria or your PRDs, you are more intentional about what you're writing. You're not just writing randomly. But the beautiful part of it is that AI can also do this research for you and document it today. But it's better to know it, so that if AI is hallucinating, we spoke about hallucination in the first class. If AI is hallucinating, you can, call AI back and say, Baba, come, you are doing too much, right? All right, so that's that about that. I built a simple platform to teach you guys how API works. So I hope you guys will like it. So let me go back to my workspace. All right. So I built this simple website so that you guys can see APIs in action. So in the same way, I have if you guys want to play around with you, feel free just to test things out yourself. Uh, all right. So here, this website has three major components. It has orders, it has product, it has users. So we're going to test all the things we have learned so far. The first part is, for example, get users, right? So if I copy this, there's something called cur. CURL is basically helping you to fill all of, or if you find a CURL, it helps you fill all of the information that you need to fill, the body, the whatever, at once, so that you don't have to fill it manually into the test environment, right? So in this case, I want to get all the users in that particular platform that I built. Please, yes. So you see Ada Lovelace, Alan Turing, Grace Hooper, Olusololu Yomi, Dandili Philip, which is exactly the users. Let's go back to users. Exactly the users that are here. So say I want to delete one, right? I gave you an example of a delete endpoint, right? So which means let's look for it. If I have delete, yes, delete user. So I told you that the base URL, this is already giving you the base URL, which is the project URL, right? You can just copy this core. If you have an endpoint that already has a CURL, it's better. It's faster, basically. You just paste it. You keep on plus. Sorry. Give me a minute. Oof, sorry. All right, so you click on plus and then just paste, right? Just paste your endpoint, your core, right? All right, so now I've pasted this. No, this is not my core. This is not it. What is it? Yes, delete. All right, so you see my endpoint, which is the base URL. The base URL is this, and sorry, the base URL is this, and then it has this guy, which is the information. However, I need the UUID to be able to go in, so to say. Now, I was speaking about when I was teaching you guys at that time. I said the components, you have the base URL, and then you have the paths, and then the query param. When you see question mark, that's the query param. You can also come and see the query param here if you are using Postman. It's usually somewhere here, right? This place I'm clicking on. So if I delete it from here, it will delete from here as well. So you can always just add it here optionally, right? So let me copy the ID. Was this the one I used to get all the users? All the users. So what does this require? It's asking me for ID, I think. So let's go and look for UID. Let me delete my own, or let me delete Lovelace, right? So that won't be partial. Right? Delete Lovelace, copy. So I can come here and do delete the new endpoints. I've not tested this, by the way, so have mercy on me in case it doesn't work. Okay, so I guess why it didn't work. Okay. Unexpected E or not operator. Oh. Okay, successful. All right, so you can see here now, if I come back to the dashboard, Lovelace will probably be disappeared, right? So you can play around it in your leisure, by the way. So as you can see, we had 5 users here before. Now we have 4 because I have deleted one of them. So if I call the same endpoints that we had initially that got us, sorry guys, this thing is too bright for me. It's too big. All right, so if I call this same endpoint that got us 5 results the other time, right? If I call this same endpoint, it will most likely give us 4, right? Let's try again and delete Alan Turing, right? Copy Alan, put the ID. Boom. And then if I try it again now, we'll have just 3. Please tell me we have just 3. Please tell me we have just 3. Alan didn't delete. Why? What happened? Sorry, I didn't paste Alan. All right, so then query. Yes, as you can see, we have just 3. All right, so what if we want to add a new data, right, into these our websites? I want to add a new data entirely using the API, right? You can check the API reference, which is the API documentation, and then check, is there an endpoint to add user? Yes, which is a post, right? So we come here and then either you copy everything little by little, copy the base URL, copy the slash, right? Where is it? Copy the parts. if there's query param as well, you copy it separately, or you just copy the CURL if it exists in the API. Most APIs used to have CURL. Let me show you for Paystack. Paystack documentation, API reference, transaction. Yes, you see, they have a core, so you can just copy directly without having to copy base URL and all of that, which could take a lot of time for you. So in the case of this, by example, we can just copy this base URL to add users. So in this case, I'm adding a new request, put it here. No, we'll send you work. It didn't copy. Okay. So which user should we add? Let me add my Oga, Innocent. Innocent Ugo. Say, Ugo at example.com. Let's give you member, right? And then send a request, right? If we go back to the website now and check the dashboard, you see Innocent is already here as well. So you can do the same thing for products. You can do the same thing for orders. It doesn't matter. The point is that APIs, we have done delete now. We've done updates. Which one should we do again? Should we do, where's the endpoint there? I try to add as much endpoint as possible for you guys so that you can play around it. There's also patch for user, right? Maybe I want to change the role of a user from, for example, yeah, let's just change the role. Let's change his role. He was member now, right? So let's change his role to admin. Okay. So what's his ID now? I have to go and call that endpoints. Ugo. Get his ID. Let's say query param. Remember, this is query param. Anytime you see question mark, it's called query param. And I've explained what query params are. They are basically filters that you add to say, okay, perform this action for this user, right? So I'm trying to update is this user's permission to admin. Remember, initially we created him as what's his distance again? Initially was just member. We can also maybe downgrade him. I don't know if the API allows it. I didn't have enough time to test all class, but it should. Right? Yeah, it allows it. All right, so I can return it back as user member. So let's check if it has updated to member. Yeah. So ideally, this is how APIs work. So when you go to your website and you click on a button, bam, and that button is sending a request, just the way we are doing test now. I was sending the request. It's sending a request that is updating what you are seeing in real time. Maybe you make payments in a platform, or basically every action you take in any platform that you use today are powered by APIs, right? And then you can utilize them. But now that you know the power how APIs work, I will leave this website for you guys so that you guys can play around it. You can try to use Postman for those of us that have not used Postman before. You can try to use I don't have a Swagger doc for it, so you can just use Postman and play around it and then see if it works for you. All right. Any questions, anybody?